Revenge with Karen.
The conference room smelled like ozone and that specific brand of desperate ambition that only comes from a mid-level executive wearing a suit that cost more than his car. I sat there, staring at a smudge on the glass wall, listening to the new director of operations, a guy named Brent who had been with the company for exactly 72 hours. Brent looked like he was assembled in a factory that produced LinkedIn influencers. His teeth were too white, his tan was too orange for an Oregon winter, and his vocabulary consisted entirely of words like synergy, pivot, and lean methodology. He didn't know a server from a toaster oven, but here he was, holding my career in his manicured hands. "Karen," he said, leaning forward and clasping his hands together in a power pose he definitely learned from a YouTube tutorial. "We've been reviewing the organizational efficacy of the cloud infrastructure silos. Frankly, your position represents a legacy bottleneck. We're pivoting to a more agile, distributed management style." I blinked. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. I've been in this industry for 20 years. I built this company's backend when the cloud was just something that rained on you in November. I hand-coded the API bridges that process $3 million in transactions a day. I am the reason the CEO can check his stock portfolio from his yacht in the Mediterranean without a latency lag. But to Brent, I was just a woman in a Patagonia vest and comfortable shoes who didn't smile enough during the Zoom happy hours. Effective immediately, Brent continued, sliding a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. "Your contract is terminated. Need you to hand over the system keys and access credentials before you leave the building today. HR has prepared your severance package." I looked at the paper. It was a standard termination letter, probably drafted by a paralegal who was currently doom-scrolling on TikTok. It was insulting, sure, but mostly it was funny. It was funny in the way a toddler playing with a loaded handgun is funny, terrifying, absurd, and destined to end with a loud noise. "I'm afraid I cannot," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when a junior dev accidentally deleted a production database. Flat, unemotional. Brent's smile faltered for a microsecond. "Excuse me? This isn't a negotiation, Karen. This is a directive." "I understand the English language, Brent," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But you're asking for something you don't understand. I can't just hand over the system. Architecture isn't a set of keys you jingle in your pocket. It's a biometric-locked, sovereignty-based infrastructure. And currently, due to the specific language in my consultancy agreement, which I assume you read, I am the designated root owner." He laughed, a short bark of a laugh. "We have an IT department, Karen. We'll reset your passwords. Just give us the hardware token and go." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the arrogance masking the incompetence. It's a common flavor in tech management these days. By the way, if you enjoy stories about corporate idiots getting absolutely wrecked by their own hubris, you might want to hit subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me buy the premium coffee I need to tolerate people like Brent. Anyway, back to the disaster in progress. "I don't think you understand," I said softly. "If I walk out that door without a formal 30-day joint offboarding sequence as stipulated in my contract, the system interprets it as a hostile takeover. It's a failsafe. I built it that way to protect the company from external hacks or internal stupidity. We'll take our chances," Brent sneered. He stood up, adjusting his tie. "Security will escort you out. Leave your badge on the table." I stood up. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, cold sensation in my chest, not sadness, but the clinical detachment of a surgeon watching a patient insist on operating on themselves. I placed my badge on the table. It made a hollow clack. "Okay, Brent," I said, "it's Friday. I'm going to go home and tend to my hydrangeas. I suggest you call the CFO. Tell him you've saved the company my salary. I'm sure he'll be thrilled." I walked out of the room. The glass door hissed shut behind me. I walked past the server room, past the rows of blinking blue lights that were currently humming along in perfect harmony, orchestrated by scripts I wrote 3 years ago at 4 a.m. on a caffeine bender. I walked past the open plan office, where young developers were wearing noise-canceling headphones, oblivious that their digital world was about to implode. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The security guard, an older guy named Mike, who I'd shared Christmas cookies with for 5 years, looked confused when I handed him my parking pass. "Leaving early, Karen?" he asked. Yeah, Mike, I said, pulling on my raincoat. Permanent vacation. You might want to hold onto your hat. It's going to get windy up on the 14th floor. I walked out into the gray Oregon drizzle. I got into my Subaru, tossed my bag in the passenger seat, and didn't look back. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just checked my watch. It was 2:15 p.m. Automated compliance sweep ran at 5 o'clock p.m. Brent had exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes before he realized he hadn't just fired an employee. He had fired the only person who knew how to keep the engine running, and he had thrown the keys into a volcano. My garden is a lot like my code: organized, resilient, and intolerant of pests. I spent Saturday morning deadheading the rhododendrons and pulling weeds from the raised beds. Oregon mist was heavy, that kind of soaking rain that chills you to the bone if you aren't dressed for it, but I love it. It clarifies things. It washes away the dust. My phone was inside on the kitchen counter. I had turned the ringer off, a bold move for someone who had spent the last decade on call 24/7, sleeping with a laptop under the pillow like a security blanket. But I wasn't on call anymore. I was terminated. I was knee-deep in mulch, 3 miles away at the corporate headquarters. The digital ecosystem I had nurtured was beginning to panic. Here's the thing about the architecture I built. It wasn't just a bunch of servers stacked in a rack. It was a living organism. When I designed the cloud migration strategy 7 years ago, the board was terrified of data breaches. They wanted Fort Knox in the sky. So I gave them Fort Knox, implemented a dead man switch protocol. The system required a biometric heartbeat, my specific digital signature, to authorize root-level changes. If my Active Directory status was changed to terminated without the corresponding cryptographic key generated by my hardware token, the system assumed the network had been compromised by a hostile actor. It wasn't a trap. It was a security feature they paid me a bonus to install. Just forgot it existed. Around noon on Saturday, I went inside to make tea. I glanced at my personal tablet, a secure, air-gapped device I used for my consulting documentation. A single notification blinked on the screen. It was a passive alert from the system's external monitoring node. Alert: unauthorized user removal detected. Root ownership orphaned. Initiating level 1 defense protocols. I took a sip of my Earl Grey. It was hot, bergamot-scented perfection. At the office, as I later learned from the logs, things were getting interesting. Brent, in his infinite wisdom, had decided to clean house over the weekend. He instructed the IT manager, a spineless guy named Jason, who I'd carried through 3 performance reviews, to manually reroute the admin permissions. Just strip her access, Brent had probably said, sipping a kale smoothie. We need to show we're in control. Jason tried, logged into the admin console. He found my user profile. He clicked deactivate. That click was the digital equivalent of pulling the pin on a grenade and dropping it down your trousers. Down in the server pit, there was a junior admin named Kevin. I liked Kevin. He was a good kid, self-taught, eager. He messaged me on Signal around 2 o'clock p.m. I saw the message pop up on my tablet but didn't open it. The preview read, Karen, WTF. Dashboards are turning red. Jason tried to kill your pseudo access and the load balancers just locked us out. Brent is screaming. Please tell me this is a drill. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Legally, I was no longer authorized to interact with company systems or personnel regarding proprietary data. Responding would be a violation of the termination agreement Brent was so eager to enforce. I went back to the kitchen and started chopping vegetables for a stew. Imagine the scene. The defense protocol I wrote was designed to stop ransomware. Its first step was isolation. It immediately severed connections to all non-whitelisted IP addresses. Since Brent had just authorized a change that the system interpreted as a hack, the system decided that the office itself was the hostile entity. By 4 o'clock p.m., the internal email server stopped syncing. By 5 o'clock p.m., the VPN kicked everyone off. By 6 o'clock p.m., the automated compliance bots, nasty little scripts that run audits for GDPR and SOX regulations, woke up. They looked for the root owner to verify the integrity of the data. They found nothing. Just a void where my digital signature used to be. The bots did what they were programmed to do. They flagged a critical compliance breach. I poured a glass of Pinot Noir and sat on my porch, listening to the rain hit the roof. The silence of my phone was deafening, beautiful. I knew that right now, in a glass office downtown, Brent was probably shouting at a monitor, slamming his fist on a desk, demanding to know why he couldn't log into his email. He probably thought the internet was down. He had no idea that he had just triggered a cascading failure that would cost the company more per hour than he made in a year. I took a sip of wine. It tasted like oak and blackberries, tasted like vindication. Monday mornings in the corporate world are usually defined by the smell of stale coffee and the crushing weight of existential dread. But this Monday was special. This Monday was electric. I woke up at 7 a.m. purely out of habit. I stretched, listened to the silence of the house, and decided to make pancakes. Blueberry pancakes. The kind that take time. While I was whisking batter, the CFO of my former company, a man named Marcus, who had a nervous tick in his left eye whenever the stock price dipped, was receiving the most expensive email of his life. Well, technically, he didn't receive the email on his work account because the email servers were locked down. He received it on his personal phone via a critical alert from the external auditing firm that monitors the company's compliance status. I can recite the text of that alert from memory because I wrote the template for it 5 years ago. Critical security event, level 5 breach. Unauthorized attempt to reassign cloud root ownership detected. Identity verification failed. Data risk exposure, $480 million. Escalating to board of directors, $480 million. That was the estimated value of the proprietary data, client lists, intellectual property currently sitting in the cloud containers I built. And right now, the system was treating that data like it was being held hostage. Because in a way it was, held hostage by its own immune system. I sat at my kitchen island, pouring syrup. My phone, which I had finally turned back on, started buzzing. It wasn't a ring, it was a seizure. Unknown numbers. Numbers I recognized. The legal department. The head of HR, Jason, IT manager, and of course, Brent. I let it buzz. I watched it dance across the granite counter like a possessed beetle. The sequence of events at the office must have been cinematic. Marcus, the CFO, likely sprinted down the hallway to the IT department, bypassing the elevators because panic provides excellent cardio. He would have found the IT pit in shambles. Screens black. Junior admins sitting on the floor, looking traumatized. Jason sweating through his dress shirt, trying to explain to a room full of executives why admin 123 wasn't unlocking the core infrastructure. And Brent was probably still trying to bluff his way through it. I could hear his voice in my head, that slick, unearned confidence. It's just a glitch, Marcus. We're deploying a patch. Standard maintenance hiccups. But you can't patch a missing limb. Around 9:30 a.m., a courier arrived at my front door. It was a bike messenger, looking soaked and miserable. He handed me a thick envelope marked urgent legal. Sign here, please, he grunted. I signed. I opened the envelope. It was a cease and desist letter, drafted over the weekend by the company's panicked general counsel. It accused me of sabotage, malicious withholding of company property, and cyber terrorism. It demanded I immediately provide the encryption keys or face federal prosecution. I laughed. A genuinely laugh. They were threatening me with jail for a house they locked themselves out of. I walked into my home office, a room filled with more computing power than the Apollo missions, and sat at my personal rig. I pulled up the contract I had signed 7 years ago. I scanned it, highlighted 2 specific clauses, and saved it as a PDF. Then, I opened my personal email. I drafted a reply to the General Counsel, CCing Marcus, the CFO, and the Board of Directors' external liaison email, which I knew because I set it up. Subject, accusations of sabotage. Dear legal team, I am in receipt of your letter. Please be advised that I am no longer an employee of the company, having been terminated effective Friday at 2:00 p.m. by Director Brent Miller. As per my exit interview, which did not happen, and the handover protocol, which was refused, I am currently a private citizen. The sabotage you are experiencing is a contractual security feature known as owner sovereignty, detailed in Clause 11.7 of my employment agreement. The system is functioning exactly as designed to prevent unauthorized takeovers. My biometric token is the only key. It is currently in my possession. However, since my contract was terminated without the required 30-day notice and joint offboarding procedure, I am under no legal obligation to perform work for a non-employer. If you wish to engage my services to resolve this issue, please contact my consultancy firm. My rate card is attached. Best, Karen. I hit send. The beauty of the situation wasn't just the money. It was the fact that the root token, the physical hardware key they needed, was a U-Buy key sitting in my desk drawer. It wasn't on a server. It wasn't in the cloud. It was a piece of plastic the size of a thumb drive. And without my fingerprint to activate it, it was just a piece of plastic. The frantic buzzing of my phone stopped for exactly 3 minutes after I sent that email. Silence. The silence of a room full of lawyers realizing they had brought a knife to a nuclear war. Then it started ringing again. This time, it was the chairman of the board. I wasn't in the boardroom, obviously. I was at Trader Joe's buying dark chocolate peanut butter cups. But I've sat in enough of those meetings to know exactly what the air tasted like. It tasted like recycled air conditioning and imminent lawsuits. Based on the texts I later received from a sympathetic executive assistant named Sarah, the emergency board meeting was called for 11 o'clock a.m. They couldn't even use the conference room monitors because the AV system was tied to the network, which was currently assuming the building was under siege by North Korean hackers. So they had to use a whiteboard, a dry erase marker, the analog tools of defeat. Brent walked in, reportedly still trying to maintain his swagger. He probably had a folder full of buzzwords ready. Transitional friction, he'd call it. Legacy debt. But the board wasn't interested in friction. We're interested in the $480 million liability flag that had triggered an automatic notification to their insurance underwriters. The chairman, a terrifying 70-year-old man named Mr. Henderson, who made his fortune in steel before pivoting to tech, was sitting at the head of the table. Henderson didn't like excuses. He liked spreadsheets. And right now, his spreadsheets were bleeding. Explain, Henderson said. One word. No pleasantries. It's a personnel issue, Brent said, smoothing his tie. We let go of a legacy architect, Karen, who had created a siloed environment. She's reacting poorly. It's a temper tantrum. We're working around it. Working around it. Marcus, the CFO, spoke up. He was pale. He had seen my email. Brent, she didn't react. She went home. The system locked us out because you fired the root owner without transferring the keys. Did you ask for the keys? She refused to hand them over. Brent protested. She was insubordinate. She said she couldn't, Marcus corrected, looking at a printout of my email. She said the contract required a joint offboarding. Did you read her contract, Brent? Silence. The kind of silence that is heavy enough to crush a human spine. I relied on HR's summary, Brent stammered. You fired the architect of our entire revenue stream, Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, which was never a good sign, without reading the documentation. You treated the back end of a $500 million company like it was a Gmail account. Brent tried to pivot. The system is flawed if one person can hold it hostage. That's the problem I was trying to fix. It's not flawed, you idiot, another board member snapped. It's secure. It's exactly what we paid for after the 2018 breach. We wanted a system that couldn't be hijacked by a rogue admin. Karen isn't the rogue admin here. You are. That was the moment, the crack in the facade. The realization that the shiny new director was just a vandal in a suit. Meanwhile, in the aisles of Trader Joe's, I was deciding between the sea salt brownies and the gluten-free cookies. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Sarah. Henderson just threw a marker at the wall. I think Brent is crying. They're asking for your number. I smiled at a display of organic bananas. The thing about corporate politics is that power is an illusion. They think power is a title. They think power is the ability to fire people. But real power is infrastructure. Real power is knowing that if you stop typing, the world stops turning. I checked my crypto wallet on my phone. Nothing yet, but I knew it was coming. The board wasn't going to sue me. Couldn't risk the discovery phase of a lawsuit where it would come out that their director of operations didn't know how to read a contract. They were going to pay. I walked to the checkout. The cashier, a cheerful guy with a nose ring, asked me how my day was going. Oh, you know, I said, scanning my card. Just watching the world burn from a safe distance. It's surprisingly relaxing. Back in the boardroom, the conversation had shifted from how do we punish her? How much does she want? They were running the numbers. The cost of a full system rebuild, estimated at 6 months and $50 million, plus the lost revenue, plus the client churn. The cost of paying Karen's consulting fee, expensive but immediate. It wasn't a choice. It was a ransom negotiation where the hostage was their own stupidity. The devil isn't in the details, the devil is in the addendums. Specifically, Addendum B. Clause 14.2 of the Independent Contractor Agreement I signed 7 years ago. While I was unpacking my groceries, the company's legal team was frantically dissecting that document. I imagine they had it projected on the wall, analyzing it like biblical scholars trying to interpret the apocalypse. Here's what they were reading. Clause 11.7, Owner Sovereignty. The contractor, Karen X, retains root access identity until a formal transfer of sovereignty event occurs. This event requires A. Biometric verification from both parties simultaneously, B. A 30-day active transition period, and C. A notarized release of liability. Clause 14.2, Breach of separation. In the event of immediate termination without the procedures in Clause 11.7, the system shall interpret the event as a hostile removal. Ownership remains with the contractor. All company access credentials will be downgraded to guest status to preserve data integrity. Reactivation requires the contractor's physical presence and biometric unlock. It was airtight. I wrote it that way not because I plan to hold them ransom, but because I've seen this movie before. I've seen companies fire the old guard, hire a bunch of cheap replacements, and then blame the old guard when the new guys delete the database. I wasn't going to let my reputation be ruined by someone else's incompetence. If the ship went down, I wanted proof that I wasn't at the helm. The legal team must have been sweating through their suits. There was no loophole. There was no force majeure. Brent had simply violated the terms of the physics of the contract. Around 1:00 p.m., I received another email. This one was from the general counsel again, but the tone had shifted dramatically. On were the threats of cyber terrorism. Now, it sounded like a frantic ex-boyfriend trying to get back together. Subject, urgent. Consulting arrangement, dear Miss Last Name. We have reviewed the documentation and believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the nature of your departure. We would like to discuss an immediate reinstatement of your role to facilitate a smooth transition. Please contact us immediately. Misunderstanding. That's corporate speak for we stepped on a landmine. I didn't reply immediately. I let them stew. I sat down at my computer and opened a blank invoice template. My consulting firm, Gray Rock Systems, named after the psychological technique of being as uninteresting as a rock to toxic people, had never actually billed anyone. It was just a shell for tax purposes. Today, it was going to make its first sale. I typed in the line items. 1. Emergency system recovery consultation. Flat rate. 2. Expedited service fee immediate deployment. 3. Breach of contract penalty per clause 14.2. 4. Inconvenience fee because Brent was rude. I didn't actually write because Brent was rude, but the number I put in the total column reflected it. The total came to a number that would buy a very nice house in the hills, or a small island. It was obscene. It was 5 times my annual salary, and it was non-negotiable. I saved the invoice as a PDF. Back at the office, the situation was deteriorating. The guest status mentioned in clause 14.2 had kicked in. This meant that while the servers were running, no one could change anything. They couldn't update the website. They couldn't process refunds. They couldn't even update the cafeteria menu on the intranet. They were frozen in time, and the clients were starting to notice. I checked Twitter or X, whatever. A few users were complaining. Why is the company name portal down? Is anyone else getting a 403 forbidden error? I took a screenshot of the tweets. I added them to a folder titled Leverage. It wasn't about malice. I didn't hate the company. I loved the systems I built. They were beautiful, elegant structures of logic. Watching them lock down was like watching a well-trained guard dog bite an intruder. I wasn't proud of the bite, but I was proud of the training. I finally replied to the general counsel. Subject, urgent, consulting arrangement. I am not interested in reinstatement. That bridge has been burned. However, Gray Rock Systems is available for emergency crisis management. Attached is a statement of work and an invoice for the unlocking procedure. Payment terms, immediate wire transfer. Crypto preferred, but I'll accept a certified wire. Once funds clear, it will arrive on site with the token. P.S. Please ensure Mr. Miller is not present when I arrive. I find his management style disruptive to the technical process. I hit send. Then I went to make a sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on sourdough, the simple pleasures. While I ate my sandwich, the IT department was engaged in a futile exercise known as brute force stupidity. According to Kevin, my insider in the server pit, Jason had authorized a hard reboot of the primary cluster. This is the equivalent of trying to fix a heart attack by turning the patient off and on again. When the servers came back up, they didn't boot into the standard OS. They booted into the sovereignty shell. It's a minimal command line interface that I designed specifically for this scenario. It has a black background and a single blinking green cursor. No GUI, no mouse support, just a prompt asking for the encryption key. Enter root token biometric hash. That's it. That's all they saw. Jason apparently tried to bypass it by booting from a rescue disk. The system detected the unauthorized boot media and encrypted the drive headers. Now, instead of just being locked out, the data was effectively scrambled. It's eating itself, Kevin texted me. Jason tried to mount the drive, and the RAID controller just started rewriting zeros. I think he's going to throw up. I felt a twinge of pity for the hardware. The drives were innocent. They were just following orders. The access lockout wasn't just about the servers, though. The integration I built went deep. It controlled the building's badge access system, because why have two databases? So, when the system went into defensive mode, it locked the doors. Not the fire exits, I'm not a monster, and fire code is sacred, but the internal secure doors. The server room door clicked shut. The executive washroom door locked. Brent was reportedly trapped in the hallway between the marketing department and the executive wing, unable to badge into his own office. I imagined him standing there, banging on the glass, realizing that the legacy bottleneck he fired was actually the only thing allowing him to use the bathroom in privacy. The deadlock was absolute. Modern tech stack is a house of cards resting on a foundation of permissions. If you remove the foundation, the cards don't just fall, they vanish. By 3:00 p.m., the realization had set in. There was no workaround. There was no backdoor. I didn't believe in backdoors. They are security vulnerabilities. The front door was the only door, and I had the only key. The silence from the legal team regarding my invoice was likely due to the sticker shock. We're probably running it up the chain, trying to find someone, anyone, who could authorize a payment that large without a board vote. But they didn't have time for vote. Every minute the system was down, they lost roughly $10,000 in transaction fees alone. My invoice was $2.5 million. The math was simple. In 250 minutes, about 4 hours, the loss would exceed my fee. They had already been down for nearly 24 hours. We're already in the hole. Paying me was the cheap option. I sat in my living room watching the rain streak the windows. I felt like a mechanic watching a driver refuse to change his oil for 50,000 miles, only to act surprised when the engine seized. It wasn't magic, it was maintenance. Then the phone rang. It wasn't the lawyer. It wasn't the CFO, it was Brent calling from a cell phone. I stared at the screen, unknown caller, but I knew it was him. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. I picked up. I didn't say anything, I just listened. Karen, his voice was different. The swagger was gone. It was thin, reedy, trembling. Karen, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Who is this? I asked, my voice pleasant, confused. It's Brent. Look, the system is doing something. We need you to come in. We can talk about renegotiating your contract. I'm sorry, Brent, I said. I'm not an employee. Can't discuss internal company matters. It's a liability issue. Karen, please. He sounded like he was about to crack. The board is, they're going to kill me. Just tell me the password. Is it written down somewhere? It's a biometric token, Brent. It uses my fingerprint. Unless you have my severed finger, you're out of luck. Then come in, just come in and fix it. I sent my terms to legal, I said. Once the wire clears, I'll be there. Until then, I suggest you stop rebooting the servers. You're corrupting the index. I hung up. Then I blocked the number. Salt the earth, burn the bridge. After I blocked Brent, the CFO Marcus tried to email me directly. Karen, be reasonable. We can't wire that amount today. There are banking limits. Can we do a partial payment and a promissory note? I looked at the email. Promissory note. An IU. From the company that just fired me without cause. I replied, my rate is based on the complexity of the recovery. The price increases by 10% for every hour past 4:00 p.m. due to the compounding data corruption caused by your IT team's attempted overrides. Current invoice revised attached. I wasn't bluffing. The corruption was getting worse. The RAID arrays were out of sync. Fixing it was going to take me all night. I deserved the hazard pay. I sat there, sipping my tea, watching the clock. 3:45 p.m., 3:50 p.m. I wasn't doing this for greed. Okay, maybe 10% greed. but 90% of it was educational. I was teaching them a lesson that no MBA program covers. Do not mess with the people who build the roads you drive on. At 3:58 p.m., my phone pinged. A notification from my bank. Incoming wire transfer, $2,750,000 and 0 cents. Status, pending. They paid the rush fee, the penalty, and the Brent tax. I felt a rush of adrenaline, not joy exactly, but the feeling of a heavy weight settling into place. Gravity working as intended. I replied to Marcus, funds received. I will be on site in 45 minutes. I went upstairs and changed. I took off my gardening clothes. I put on my consultant uniform, dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and my heavy boots. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired, yes, but I also looked like someone who owned the building. I grabbed the U-Buy key from my desk. It was so small, a little black rectangle on a keychain, the most expensive object in Portland right now. I drove to the office. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black. When I pulled into the parking garage, the gate wouldn't open. Of course. The system was locked down. I rolled down my window and pressed the intercom button. Security. Mike's voice crackled. It's Karen, I said. I'm here to turn the lights back on. Oh, thank God, Mike said. The gate rattled and lifted manually. I parked in my old spot. It was still empty. I walked to the elevator. It was disabled. Stairs it is, I muttered. 14 floors, good cardio. I climbed the stairs. By the time I reached the 14th floor, I wasn't winded. I was fueled by a cold, burning purpose. I opened the stairwell door. The hallway was dark. Emergency lights were humming. It looked like a horror movie set. And there, waiting by the glass doors of the server room, was the welcoming committee. Marcus, the CFO, looking like he had aged 10 years. The general counsel looking furious, and Brent. Brent looked diminished. His tie was loose. His hair was messy. He wouldn't make eye contact. You're late, the general counsel snapped. I checked my watch. I'm exactly on time. Now, if you want your company back, step aside. Didn't wait for them to move. I walked right through them. The server room door was locked with a magnetic seal. I pulled out the U-Buy key. I didn't need to plug it in yet. First, I needed to disable the physical lock. I punched in a manual override code on the keypad, a code that only exists in my head. Beep, click. The door hissed open. A blast of cold air hit me. The fans were running at 100%, trying to cool the panicked processors. I walked. The blue lights of the racks were pulsing in a chaotic rhythm. I walked to the main console. The screen was black, save for the blinking green cursor. Enter root token biometric hash. I looked back at the executives standing in the doorway. Close the door, I said. This is a sterile procedure. They closed the door. It took me 6 hours to unsnarl the mess. While I was typing commands, watching lines of code cascade down the screen like the Matrix rain, the outside world was catching up to the drama. Tech Twitter is a small, vicious place. Word had leaked. Maybe Kevin tweeted something, maybe a client talked. But by 6:00 p.m., threads were popping up, hearing rumors that company fired their lead architect and now can't access their own backend. Classic FOFO. Never fire the person who knows why the legacy code is commented out. My LinkedIn inbox, which I checked during a progress bar load, was exploding. Recruiters, CTOs of rival companies. Karen, heard you're on the market. We have a strict no idiots policy. Let's talk. Hey Karen, Amazon AWS recruiter here. It was validating. For years, I had been the invisible woman, the one who fixed things before they broke, the one who didn't get the credit because it just works. Now, the silence of the system was screaming my value louder than I ever could. Inside the server room, the atmosphere was meditative. I reverted the permission tables. I decrypted the drive headers. I synced the RAID arrays. Around 9:00 p.m., the guest status lifted. The lights on the racks shifted from a frantic strobe to a steady, rhythmic pulse. The heartbeat of the company returned. I ran the final integrity check. System status, normal, root owner, Karen X. Warning, external attempt logged. I cleared the warning log. I stood up and stretched. My back cracked. I walked out of the server room. Executives were sitting in the open plan office, waiting like parents outside a principal's office. They had ordered pizza. The smell of pepperoni and shame filled the air. It's done, I said. Marcus jumped up. It's working. The dashboard is green. Everything is back online, I said. Data loss was minimal. Mostly just whatever you guys tried to write to the drive between Saturday and today. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Thank you. Karen, really. I looked at him. Don't thank me. You paid for a service. Transaction complete. I looked at Brent. He was sitting on a desk, staring at his shoes. One more thing, I said. They all looked at me. The root ownership is still tied to me. I just unlocked the door. I didn't give you the key. But we paid you, the lawyer sputtered. You paid me to restore access, I corrected. Transferring ownership is a separate process. As per clause 11.7, requires a 30-day transition period. So, unless you want to do this again next weekend, I suggest you hire me back. As a consultant, on my terms. What are your terms? Marcus asked, resigned. I report to the board, not to operations. I retain veto power on all infrastructure changes. And I pointed at Brent. He doesn't have admin access, ever. Marcus looked at Brent. Then he looked at me. Done, Marcus said. Brent didn't even look up. Next morning, the office was different. It was quieter. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a bruised humility. I walked in at 10 o'clock a.m. I didn't swipe a badge. Security opened the door for me. I went straight to the boardroom. The board was there. Henderson, the chairman, looked tired. Brent was not there. Where's Mr. Miller? I asked, setting my coffee on the table. Mr. Miller has decided to pursue other opportunities, Henderson said dryly. Effective immediately. That's a shame, I said. I hope he reads his next contract. We spent the next hour signing paperwork. My new contract was a thing of beauty. It wasn't an employment contract. It was a retainer. I was now an external advisor. I cost 3 times as much as I did as an employee, and I had 0 HR responsibilities. I didn't have to go to the holiday party. I didn't have to do peer reviews. I just had to keep the lights on. At the end of the meeting, I pulled a small box out of my bag. Inside was a new U-Buy key. This is the secondary root token, I said, sliding it across the table to Henderson. It's configured for the chairman's biometric signature. I suggest you keep it in a safe. Henderson picked it up like it was a holy relic. And yours? I keep the primary, I said, just in case. He nodded. He understood. The trust was gone. It had been replaced by mutually assured destruction. And honestly, it's a much more stable foundation for a corporate relationship. I walked out of the building around noon. The sun was actually shining, a rare Oregon miracle. I checked my bank account on my phone. The balance was ridiculous. It looked like a phone number. I wasn't going to buy a Lamborghini. I wasn't going to move to a private island. I was going to go to the nursery. I needed more mulch. And maybe I'd buy that expensive Japanese maple I'd been eyeing. As I drove home, I thought about the nature of systems. People think the cloud is ethereal, magical. It's not. It's metal and electricity and logic. It's brutal in its binary nature. 0 or 1, access or denied. There's no maybe in the back end. Brent tried to live in the maybe. He tried to bullshit a Boolean operator, and he got returned as false. I pulled into my driveway. My hydrangeas were still wet from yesterday's rain. They looked resilient. I sat on my porch, opened a beer, and listened to the silence. No buzzing phone, no panicked emails. Just the quiet hum of a system running perfectly under the control of the only person who knew how to drive it. I took a sip. Best $2.75 million beer I ever tasted.